The Kansas sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson as rancher Abe Sterling finished tending his cattle for the evening. It was September 1903, and Abe had been working his small ranch alone for 12 years since his wife, Mary, passed away from fever. The quiet life suited him fine as he found peace in the rhythm of caring for animals and tending the land. Abe was heading toward his barn to check on a sick calf when he heard voices coming from inside the structure. He paused and listened carefully. Living alone had made him cautious about unexpected visitors, but these sounded like young voices, mixed with exhaustion and desperation. Hello in there, Abe called out as he approached the barn door. I know someone is inside. You might as well come out so we can talk properly. A small head appeared around the corner of a hay bale. It belonged to a boy of perhaps 10 years old with dark hair and frightened eyes. Please, mister, we are not stealing anything. We just needed a place to rest and get out of the wind. Abe set down his pitchfork and held up his hands to show he meant no harm. Son, I am not angry about you being in my barn, but I need to know who you are and why you are hiding from something. 3 more boys emerged from behind the hay bales. They ranged in age from perhaps 8 to 13 years old. All were thin and showed signs of having traveled far under difficult conditions. Most importantly, they looked terrified, as if they were running from grave danger. What were your names, boys? Abe asked as he studied their young faces. And where did you come from? The oldest boy stepped forward with the bearing of someone who had learned to take responsibility for others. I am Daniel Washington, and I am 12 years old. This is my friend Matthew Chen, he is 11. That is Luke Martinez, he is 10, and the little one is Mark Murphy, he is 8. Abe noticed that Daniel was clutching something against his chest with both hands. It appeared to be a large book bound in worn black leather. Daniel, that looks like a Bible you are holding. Are you boys traveling preachers? Abe asked with gentle humor, trying to put them at ease. Daniel looked down at the book he carried, then back at Abe. This Bible belonged to Reverend Thomas Mitchell, who ran the Good Hope children's home where we lived. Before they killed him, he had something inside it and told us to find someone honest who could help us. Abe felt his blood run cold. Reverend Mitchell had been one of the most respected men in Kansas. News of his death in a carriage accident 3 weeks ago had been reported in newspapers throughout the territory. Boys, what makes you think Reverend Mitchell was killed instead of dying in an accident? And what did he hide in that Bible? Matthew spoke up. We saw them push his carriage off the bridge. Mayor Bradley and Sheriff Wilson came to the children's home that night and argued with Reverend Mitchell about something. When he refused to do what they wanted, they killed him and made it look like an accident. Luke nodded. Before they came, Reverend Mitchell told us to hide in the cellar. He gave Daniel the Bible and said if anything happened to him, we should take it to someone who would know what to do with what was hidden inside. Mark, the youngest, climbed closer to Abe, seeking comfort from the only adult who had shown them kindness. Are you going to help us, mister? The bad men are looking for us because they know we saw what really happened. Abe knelt down to the boys' eye level. Mark, you boys are safe here, but I need to understand what Reverend Mitchell hid in that Bible and why it was worth killing. For Daniel looked at his companions, then carefully opened the worn Bible. Hidden between pages near the back was a folded piece of paper that had obviously been placed there. With great care, Reverend Mitchell wrote this note the night before they killed him, Daniel said, handing the paper to Abe. He said it contained proof of crimes that reached all the way to the territorial capital. Abe unfolded the note and began reading by the fading daylight. What he discovered made his hands shake with barely controlled rage. The note detailed systematic corruption involving the theft of funds meant for orphan children throughout Kansas. According to Reverend Mitchell's account, Mayor Bradley and several other officials had been embezzling money donated for the care of orphans. When charitable organizations sent funds to support children's homes, the money was diverted to private accounts controlled by the corrupt officials. But the conspiracy went deeper than simple theft. The note revealed that when orphanages began asking questions about missing funds, their directors faced harassment, intimidation, and in some cases murder disguised as accidents. Boys, Abe said, looking up from the damning evidence, this note contains enough proof to send Mayor Bradley and his associates to prison. but it also makes you for extremely dangerous to some very powerful people. Daniel straightened his thin shoulders. We know it is dangerous, Mr. Sterling, but Reverend Mitchell died trying to protect children who had nobody else to speak for them. We cannot let his sacrifice be wasted. Matthew added. The note says there are still over 100 children in orphanages throughout Kansas who do not know their support money is being stolen. They are living in terrible conditions while the men who are supposed to help them get rich. Luke spoke up. Reverend Mitchell was planning to take his evidence to the federal authorities in Topeka. He said territorial officials could not be trusted because too many of them were involved in the corruption. Mark looked up at Abe with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone his age. Will you help us finish what Reverend Mitchell started? Will you take his evidence to the people who can stop the bad men? Abe studied the four young faces that showed such courage and determination. These boys had witnessed a murder and risked their lives to preserve evidence that could save hundreds of other children. Boys, Reverend Mitchell was obviously a man of great courage and integrity. If he trusted you with this mission, then I will do everything I can to help you complete it. Daniel looked hopeful for the first time since Abe had found them. Does that mean you will take us to Topeka to find the federal authorities? Abe was already formulating a plan. Daniel, it means we are going to make sure Reverend Mitchell's evidence reaches people who have the power to act on it. But first we need to make copies of this note and hide them in case something happens to the original. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their planning. Abe immediately moved to the barn door and peered outside. Through the gathering darkness he could see at least 6 riders heading toward his ranch. Boys, we have company, Abe said urgently. Hide behind those hay bales and do not make a sound no matter what happens. The 4 boys disappeared into the shadows with the practiced efficiency of children who had learned to hide from danger. Abe closed the Bible carefully and slipped it inside his coat before walking out to meet his unexpected visitors. Sheriff Wilson sat on his horse surrounded by 5 armed deputies. Even in the dim light, Abe could see the cruel satisfaction on the sheriff's face. Sterling, Wilson said without dismounting, we are looking for 4 runaway boys from the children's home. They are dangerous and may be carrying stolen property. Have you seen anyone matching that description? Abe met Wilson's gaze steadily. I have not seen any children, Sheriff. What kind of stolen property are you talking about? Wilson's expression hardened. Items that belonged to the late Reverend Mitchell. Personal effects that disappeared from his quarters after the accident. If you encounter these boys, you need to notify us immediately. Abe wondered how many other people Wilson had threatened in his search for the boys and their evidence. I will keep that in mind, Sheriff. Wilson studied Abe's face, looking for any sign of deception. Just remember, Sterling, harboring fugitives is a federal crime. You would not want to find yourself in legal trouble over some lying orphans. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible Western stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. On TV, just press subscribe with your remote for more epic adventures. After Wilson and his men rode away, Abe helped the boys out of their hiding place. Their faces were pale with terror, but they showed remarkable courage for children who had just faced their worst fears. Boys, Abe said, checking the Bible to make sure it was still safely hidden. We cannot stay here any longer. Wilson knows you are in the area, and he will be back with more men to search thoroughly. Daniel looked at his companions, then back at Abe. Where can we go? Wilson has men everywhere, and he knows this country better than we do. Abe was already gathering supplies for a dangerous journey. Daniel, there is a federal judge in Topeka named Sarah Adams, who specializes in territorial corruption cases. If we can get Reverend Mitchell's evidence to her, she will have the authority to investigate the entire conspiracy. Matthew looked worried. But Topeka is over 100 miles away. How are we going to get there without Wilson catching us? Abe smiled grimly as he prepared his horses. Matthew, I have been ranching in Kansas for 20 years. I know trails and hiding places that Wilson has never heard of. We are going to honor Reverend Mitchell's memory by completing the mission he died for. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe now to follow this epic Western adventure and discover how 4 brave orphans and a determined rancher plan to expose the biggest corruption scandal in Kansas history. On TV, just hit subscribe with your remote to continue this story. The Bible that had started as a source of comfort for orphan children had become the key to justice for a murdered man of God. Now it was up to Abe and the four boys to make sure that sacred trust was honored. Abe spent the pre-dawn hours making careful copies of Reverend Mitchell's hidden note, while the four boys slept in his barn. The evidence contained in that single piece of paper was so explosive that Abe knew multiple copies hidden in different locations might be their only insurance against the powerful men who would do anything to suppress the truth. The boys proved to be remarkably resilient despite their recent trauma. Daniel organized their few possessions with military precision, while Matthew helped Abe prepare supplies for the dangerous journey to Topeka. Luke and Mark worked together to ready the horses, showing responsibility that impressed the veteran. Rancher. We need to reach Cottonwood Creek by evening, Abe explained as they prepared to leave his ranch. There's an old line cabin there where we can rest safely. After that, it is 2 more days of hard travel to reach Topeka. As they rode through the Kansas countryside, Abe learned more about the boys' lives. At Good Hope Children's Home, under Reverend Mitchell's care, it had been a place of genuine kindness, where orphan children received education, love, and preparation for productive adult lives. Daniel rode beside Abe as they made their way through hidden valleys and forgotten trails. Reverend Mitchell taught us to read and write and do arithmetic. He said education was the only way we would ever be able to make our own way in the world. Matthew brought his horse closer. He also taught us about right and wrong. He said sometimes good people have to stand up to bad people even when it is dangerous, because that is what God expects of us. Luke added. Reverend Mitchell said the money that came to support us was sacred because it came from people who cared about children they had never met. He said stealing that money was stealing from God himself. Mark, despite being the youngest, showed remarkable understanding of their situation. That is why the bad men killed him. He would not let them steal money that was meant to help us and the other children. As they traveled, Abe studied the hidden note more carefully. Reverend Mitchell had documented a network of corruption that reached far beyond simple embezzlement. Officials were not just stealing money, but systematically destroying records to cover their tracks. Boys, Abe said as they rested their horses near a hidden spring, your Reverend Mitchell gathered evidence of crimes that could destroy dozens of careers and send people to prison for life. That makes his note incredibly valuable and incredibly dangerous. Daniel nodded. That is why he told us to find someone honest who could not be bought or scared into staying quiet. He said you were known throughout Kansas as a man who always did what was right. Matthew looked worried. But what if the federal authorities do not believe us? What if they think we are just orphans making up stories about important people? Abe had been considering the same concern. Matthew, Reverend Mitchell's note is written in his own handwriting and contains specific details that can be verified. Combined with your testimony about witnessing his murder, it should convince any honest investigator. On the second day of travel, Luke, who had been watching their backtrail, returned with disturbing news. There are riders following us, Mr. Sterling. At least 8 men, and they are closing the distance fast. Abe studied their pursuers through his field glasses. Wilson had apparently organized a larger search party and was tracking them with determination. That suggested he understood exactly what evidence they carried. We need to reach Devil's Rock before they catch us, Abe decided. There are defensive positions there where we can make a stand if necessary. The chase that followed tested both horses and riders to their limits. Despite their youth, the 4 boys showed excellent riding skills and courage under pressure that reminded Abe of cavalry troopers he had known during his army days. Mark called out as they climbed toward the rocky outcrop. Why are they trying so hard to catch us? Cannot they just say Reverend Mitchell really died in an accident? Abe guided his horse around a dangerous section of trail. Mark, the note we carry proves that Reverend Mitchell was murdered to prevent him from exposing corruption. Without that evidence, Wilson and his friends might be able to convince people that his death was accidental. The battle at Devil's Rock was brief but decisive. Abe's superior position and marksmanship skills allowed him to keep Wilson's men pinned down, while the boys helped by keeping watch and maintaining their defensive perimeter. Daniel showed remarkable courage for a 12-year-old boy, calling out warnings when Wilson's men tried to flank their position. His leadership kept the younger boys calm during the intense firefight. Matthew used his sharp eyes to spot movement among the rocks below, alerting Abe to threats. Before they could develop into serious danger, Luke and Mark worked together to reload weapons and pass ammunition, showing teamwork that impressed their protector. As evening approached, Wilson called out from his position behind a boulder, "Sterling, send out those boys and whatever they stole from the Reverend's quarters. You are making this situation worse for everyone involved." Abe's response was a rifle shot that sent Wilson diving for better cover. The message was unmistakable. There would be no negotiation and no surrender of the children or the evidence they carried. The breakthrough came when Luke discovered a hidden passage through the rocks that led to the back side of Devil's Rock. Working together, they managed to escape, while Wilson's men were focused on the main defensive position. Daniel clutched the Bible protectively as they made their way through the narrow passage. This book saved our lives by hiding Reverend Mitchell's evidence. Now we have to make sure we get it to people who can use it to save other children. The final day of travel to Topeka passed without major incident, though Abe remained vigilant. For additional pursuit, the boys showed remarkable endurance despite everything they had experienced. Matthew spoke for all of them when he said, "We have come too far to give up now, Mr. Sterling." Reverend Mitchell died believing that someone would finish what he started. "We are going to make sure that someone is us." When they finally reached Topeka, federal judge Sarah Adams proved to be everything Abe had hoped. She was a stern woman of perhaps 50 years, with graying hair and the sharp eyes of someone who had spent her career fighting corruption. "This evidence represents systematic theft from charitable organizations throughout Kansas," Judge Adams said after studying Reverend Mitchell's note. "The financial records detailed here show embezzlement that reaches into multiple counties and involves dozens of officials." Daniel stepped forward to tell his story about witnessing Reverend Mitchell's murder. His clear, honest testimony helped establish the credibility of their accusations and provided crucial context for the written evidence. Matthew, Luke, and Mark added details about conditions at various children's homes throughout the territory. Their accounts painted a picture of systematic neglect funded by stolen charity money. Judge Adams studied the four young faces that showed such determination. "Boys, your courage in preserving this evidence and bringing it to federal authorities has exposed one of the largest corruption scandals in territorial history." Luke asked the question they were all thinking. "Will you be able to arrest Mayor Bradley and Sheriff Wilson? Will they be punished for killing Reverend Mitchell?" Judge Adams' expression hardened with resolve. "Son, we are going to arrest every person mentioned in this evidence. More than that, we are going to recover the stolen money and make sure it goes where it was always intended, to help children like you." Subscribe to our channel for more incredible Western stories. On TV, just press subscribe with your remote for more epic adventures that celebrate the triumph of good over evil. Don't miss the next chapter of this epic Western adventure. Subscribe now to follow the conclusion of this powerful story on TV. Just hit subscribe with your remote to see justice served and discover how a Bible's hidden message changed everything. The sacred book that had comforted generations of children had become an instrument of justice. Now, it was time to see whether the truth it contained would be powerful enough to bring down the men who had murdered a man of God. The federal investigation that followed moved with swift precision as Judge Adams coordinated raids across Kansas territory. Armed with Reverend Mitchell's detailed evidence and the boys' eyewitness testimony, federal marshals descended on corruption networks that had operated with impunity for years. The four boys watched from the courthouse steps as Mayor Bradley was led away in chains. The corrupt official, who had seemed so powerful and untouchable, now looked like what he had always been, a common criminal who preyed on society's most vulnerable members. Daniel clutched the Bible that had started their journey. Reverend Mitchell would be proud to see this day. Justice is finally being served for all the children who suffered because of these men's greed. Matthew nodded as Sheriff Wilson was also arrested. The sheriff who had terrorized them during their escape was now facing federal charges for murder, conspiracy, and embezzlement. Luke pointed to the crowd gathering outside the courthouse. "Look at all the people who came to see the arrests. Word is spreading that the children's money is finally going to be protected." Mark, despite his young age, understood the significance of what they were witnessing. Does this mean the other children in orphanages will finally get the help they were promised? Judge Adams approached the boys with obvious satisfaction. The raids have been completely successful. We have arrested 23 officials involved in the conspiracy and recovered over $40,000 in stolen funds. Abe, who had been watching the proceedings with quiet pride, asked the question that mattered most. What happens to the money that was recovered? Will it go back to helping the children it was meant for? Judge Adams smiled. Every penny will be returned to legitimate charitable organizations with strict federal oversight to ensure it reaches the children who need it. Additionally, new laws will be implemented to prevent similar theft in the future. Daniel stepped forward. Judge Adams, what about the children who are still in orphanages that were not getting proper care because their money was stolen? Will they be helped now? Judge Adams' expression grew serious. Daniel, that is one of the most important results of your courage. Federal investigators are visiting every children's home in Kansas to ensure proper conditions and adequate funding. No child will be forgotten again. The trials that followed exposed the full scope of the corruption network. Testimony from recovered financial records showed that the conspiracy had been operating for over 5 years, stealing money intended for hundreds of orphaned children. Mayor Bradley was sentenced to 20 years in federal prison, while Sheriff Wilson received 15 years for his role in Reverend Mitchell's murder and the subsequent cover-up. Other conspirators received sentences ranging from 5 to 12 years. Most importantly, the trials led to comprehensive reforms in how charitable funds were managed throughout Kansas Territory. Federal oversight was established to ensure that money donated for children's welfare actually reached its intended recipients. Matthew testified about the conditions at Good Hope Children's Home under Reverend Mitchell's care, compared to other facilities that had been deprived of proper funding. His testimony helped establish the human cost of the officials' greed. Luke provided crucial details about the night of Reverend Mitchell's murder, including conversations he had overheard between the conspirators. His precise memory helped prosecutors establish the premeditated nature of the crime. Mark, despite his youth, gave testimony that moved the courtroom to tears as he described how Reverend Mitchell had cared for orphan children and why the stolen money mattered so much to their daily lives. The boys were placed in Abe's legal custody as his adopted sons. The rancher discovered that raising for remarkable children gave new meaning to his quiet life on the Kansas prairie. Daniel, Matthew, Luke, and Mark proved to be excellent students who took seriously Reverend Mitchell's belief that education was the key to building better lives. They excelled in their studies while helping Abe with ranch work. Abe's small ranch became a gathering place for other children who had been affected by the corruption scandal. His reputation for integrity attracted families from throughout Kansas who knew they could count on his help and protection. Years later, when the boys had grown to adulthood, they established a charitable foundation in Reverend Mitchell's name. The foundation provided scholarships and support for orphan children throughout the Western Territories. Daniel became a federal prosecutor specializing in crimes against children. His experiences as an orphan gave him unique insight into the needs of vulnerable young people and made him a fierce advocate for their protection. Matthew chose to become a teacher, carrying on Reverend Mitchell's belief that education could transform lives. He established schools in rural areas where orphaned and disadvantaged children could receive quality instruction. Luke became a federal marshal dedicated to investigating corruption and protecting those who could not protect themselves. His childhood experiences taught him that evil often hides behind respectable facades. Mark followed his calling to become a minister like the man who had protected him. He established churches and orphanages throughout the frontier, ensuring that Reverend Mitchell's legacy of caring for children continued. The Bible that had hidden the evidence was donated to the new Federal Oversight Office, where it served as a reminder of how sacred texts could become instruments of justice. Its worn pages had witnessed both tragedy and triumph. Subscribe to our channel for more epic Western stories that celebrate the triumph of good over evil. On TV, just press subscribe with your remote to see more incredible adventures that prove courage comes in all ages. A memorial was erected at Good Hope Children's Home honoring Reverend Mitchell's sacrifice. and the 4 boys who had completed his mission. The inscription read, "He died so that truth might live, and they lived so that justice might triumph." The hidden note that had started their journey was preserved in the territorial archives as evidence of how corruption could be exposed when good people found the courage to act. It proved that sometimes the most important messages are those that require the greatest risks to deliver. Abe Sterling never regretted the decision to help for orphaned boys who appeared in his barn, carrying a Bible with a secret. Instead, he discovered that his greatest achievement was not building a successful ranch, but raising children who dedicated their lives to protecting others. This Western story reminds us that sacred books contain many kinds of truth, and that sometimes the most important scriptures are those written by human hands guided by divine purpose. It shows that justice delayed is not always justice denied. When there are those willing to carry the message forward no matter the cost, the Word had indeed been made flesh in the form of 4 boys who refused to let a good man's death be meaningless. Their courage ensured that Reverend Mitchell's final sermon was heard not from a pulpit, but in a courtroom where it brought down the wicked and lifted up the innocent. Don't forget to subscribe for more epic Western stories on TV. Just use your remote to hit that subscribe button and never miss an adventure that proves good always triumphs when guided by faith and courage.